Good evening. I see the same faces here as were before. Thank you for being here. And Mother, thank you for joining your son. Hey, Glenn. Let us pray. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your watch care over us, and we thank you that we could have a professional here to present anxiety, understanding it, how to recognize it, and what to do about it. Let your will be done this day as we open our minds to hear Dr. Morton present. Amen.
All right. Okay, so kind of the plan for tonight is to take a look at anxiety, get a description of what it is. We'll look at some of the specific anxiety disorders. We looked at depression last week, and basically it's depression. There's variations, but it all falls under one label. There's a million different anxiety disorders. They've got names for each different little variation. So we'll look at a few of those and then look at the kind of things that put you at risk for anxiety and some things you can do to reduce your anxiety. All right. Let's see. So speaking of anxiety, I just realized that I didn't fully switch my label from last week's presentation. So this is, what is anxiety? So anxiety has three parts to anxiety disorders have three parts to them. Okay. Anxiety, well, you'll see you can have anxiety without having anxiety disorders. Everybody gets anxious. Some people have anxiety disorders, which is where it begins to cause problems in your life. So for an anxiety disorder, there are thoughts, fears that something bad is going to happen. Okay, just to oversimplify, anxiety and depression. Depression, people have negative thoughts about all the bad things that have happened to them and that they expect to happen to them to continue into the future. Anxiety is more fear about something bad that's going to happen to you. May not have happened to you yet. And so there's that. And then the other piece of that is physiological arousal. Yes?
I had anxiety prior to all of you showing up today because I did not put the ropes around, and I was anxious to see if you guys would still sit up front. So that's a perfect example.
So that you had a fearful thought there.
I had a fearful thought, and I'm glad you all did what I was hoping you would do. I'm good now.
Okay, you're good now. Your heart rate's back down.
Yeah, back down.
Okay. So with anxiety, you have a physiological arousal, the fight or flight response. Okay, we're programmed to deal with stressful situations, and our body's set up to get ready to fight or get ready to run. And that's really useful when you're facing physical threats. Okay, when somebody's trying to hurt you, when a bear is trying to eat you, all those kinds of things, you have to decide whether to run or to fight, and your body prepares you to do that. It increases your heart rate, increases your respiration, releases adrenaline, so you have lots of energy, and some other things that we'll talk about. Now, that's great if you're having to fight the bear, okay? But if you're nervous because you're afraid people are going to sit in the back of the church, it's not real helpful, is it? Okay? So poor Gerard's over here, his heart's pounding, he can't catch his breath, and his adrenaline's pumping, so his blood pressure's up. We're not, the kind of threats we face today. Huh?
He's going to wrestle us up to
Yeah. The kind of threats we face today are usually not what we're physically prepared for.
I was just curious if you were going to take my hints from the previous seminars.
Yeah.
We're creatures of habit.
Yeah, once you've established the habit, then you're
Yeah,
good.
we did good. Thank you.
Okay. And then the third part of anxiety disorders is avoidance. Okay. And this is actually the most critical and the most important part of an anxiety disorder, although we usually think about the panic attacks, the anxiety, the racing hearts, all those kinds of things, the fear. What makes it from Gerard being anxious to an anxiety disorder is avoidance. So when you have that fear response, then you're motivated to not have that fear response again in the future. So whatever it is that made you anxious, you're going to tend to avoid. Okay, so if you get anxious being around people, you're going to avoid social contact. Yes?
I guess I have a question because avoidance doesn't help the anxiety.
It does in the short term. Okay? And we are creatures of short-term reinforcements. There are a lot of examples. If you can reinforce somebody short-term, you can set a habit in place. Drugs destroy your life, but people will destroy their lives for them because it gives you a short-term reward. If you have to speak, the most common anxiety is public speaking. So if something came up and you had to speak, and at the last minute you said, sorry, Gerard, I'm sick tonight, I can't do my seminar. How are you going to feel? All of a sudden you're going to have this relief. Okay.
I'm not done yet.
Yeah. Okay.
And those thoughts actually occurred to me tonight.
Right.
I hadn't heard from Todd. I know he'll be here, but if he's not, what am I going to do? Well,
And so when I showed up,
I have an anxiety seminar that I can do, but I wanted a professional working with anxiety and other mental health issues to do it rather than me.
Right.
So I was relieved when I saw you in the hallway.
so you were relieved, but you didn't have any opportunity to do any avoidance, and that's the key here.
Well, I thought about going home and
right. So short term, when you avoid something anxiety provoking, it's a powerful reinforcer. It feels really good, even if you might feel guilty afterwards. All those kinds of things. At the moment, when you say, "I'm not going," and it may be something else that you are nervous about doing. I'm not going, I'm going to stay home. That gives you a reinforcement and means next time you're more likely to avoid it.
I think I understand now. So if there's no avoidance, I'll give an example. In 2021, when my mom and my stepdad both got COVID and my stepdad died, and I had to figure out what we were going to do and how we were going to care for mom. And the anxiety was so intense. I had a difficult time making decisions. And maybe it was because there was no avoidance, because I could walk around the block all I wanted to and it didn't decrease.
Right. Yeah, and it varies by situations for how avoidable they are and personalities for how willing you are to avoid. You could have avoided it. Get on the plane and leave. Okay, but that wasn't, in your personality, that just wasn't an option. Okay,
I would have still been anxious.
Well, that's true. Some people are anxious anyway. They're really hard to... people do things to avoid anxiety. That's the part of the anxiety disorder that is destructive, because that causes you to change your life, change your behaviors, it impacts your job. A lot of people avoid anxiety through substance use. So people with anxiety have a higher risk of substance abuse problems because you drink, you use drugs, you smoke some marijuana, and it suddenly relieves the anxiety. So you're not avoiding the stimuli, but you're avoiding the anxiety, which means next time you're really powerfully motivated to take that drink. Okay, and so. The avoidance is kind of what leads you into the negative behavior patterns. And usually that's what distinguishes people who get nervous. People get nervous all the time. And people who have an anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders are right up there with depression as far as the most common mental health disorders. They can cause, when they're severe, they can cause a lot of other problems. Substance abuse, I mentioned. They can cause physiological problems, high blood pressure, ulcers, what else? A variety of digestive problems because of your constant sort of arousal and that fight or flight syndrome. Anxiety disorders tend to go together. So if you have one there's a good chance, at least I think it's last statistics I saw, at least a 40% that you'll have another one. So I'm going to go quickly through 4 or 5 different anxiety disorders. And if you have one, then you're at risk for another one, because they're all anxiety. And so they all have sort of that core to them. Okay. You'll see with each anxiety disorder, whether it's very focused on the physical arousal, some it's very focused on the thoughts that you're thinking, and some on the avoidance. And so that's part of the variegation. So different kinds of anxiety disorders. There's what we call specific phobias, which can be anything. That's a fear of something. You can have a phobia of flying on airplanes. You can have a phobia of spiders. You can have a phobia of literally anything that you develop a fear of. But to be a phobia, it has to involve not just fear of it, but also taking actions to avoid it. Okay, so I mentioned fear of public speaking is by far the most common fear that people have. But that's rarely a disorder. Most people don't have to speak publicly, and you can avoid speaking publicly pretty easily in most cases. So if you had to speak publicly, it would make you nervous, but it's rare that it's a persistent disorder. You can have a fear of spiders, okay? An intense fear of spiders. What will make it a disorder is what lengths you go through to avoid spiders, okay? If when you see a spider you panic, that's part of it, but that's not the whole disorder, okay? If you won't walk into a room that's dark until your husband goes in and checks for spiders, you're getting a little bit more towards the avoidance part. If you avoid going out and walking in the woods and doing outdoor activities because there might be spiders there, then you're in the territory where this is starting to affect your life and alter your life. The most common anxiety disorder is social anxiety, which is fear of interacting with people. Okay, and so we call it in mild forms being shy, but being anxious, interacting with people. That's the most common. Interestingly, all of the anxiety disorders are much more common in women than men. Okay, like I mentioned last night, women get depressed and anxious, and men get drunk and angry. Okay, that's statistically that's the way it works. But social anxiety seems to be evenly distributed among males and females, and they don't really know why. But that's a very common one. Obviously, social anxiety impacts your life a lot. Okay, so if you get nervous being around people and you start getting into the avoidance trap, then you become less socially active, put you at risk for problems like depression. Obviously, it can impair social relationships. It can impair work situations. You start going to work starts making you panicky and anxious. So, you start calling into work and you avoid work and those kinds of things. So, there's social anxiety. Agoraphobia, that's a fear of going out into public. Okay, and so people with agoraphobia get nervous. Usually it starts with Walmart, just from clinical experience, because everybody hates Walmart. But big places like that cause you anxiety, so you avoid those. But people with more severe agoraphobia, even going to the grocery store makes them anxious. Going to work. In severe cases of agoraphobia, just leaving the house, even going out in the yard, can cause intense anxiety. And then when you either come back home or when you just decide not to go out at all, you decide to order it online because everything can be delivered now, then that's a huge relief. I don't have to go. And so that reinforces you so that you avoid it even more. The pandemic was a blessing and a curse for people with social anxiety and agoraphobia, because really, you don't have to leave the house anymore, okay, except for work, and even that can be work from home. You can have everything. You can have your groceries delivered. You can have everything that you need delivered. And so it's a relief, but it sets them into that pattern that's really difficult to get out of. Let's see. Panic disorder, I want to talk about in a little bit more detail. Panic disorder is a disorder that starts with panic attacks. Okay, so this is a sudden onset, all of a sudden, your heart starts pounding, your heart starts racing, you feel like you can't breathe, your palms may get sweaty, you may feel like you're choking, chest pain, nausea, dizziness, lightheadedness, numbness or tingling, derealization, which is feeling like things are not real. It's just an intense feeling that things are not real. It's hard to describe unless you've met people who've experienced it. It's very intense. It's like things going on around me are not real. I'm not real. I'm not really here. Fear of losing control is a big one, because when all of a sudden this starts hitting you, and it comes on suddenly, often for no apparent reason, if you're sitting in church and this happens to you, you feel like you're going crazy. Okay? And so you fear that you're going to go crazy. You're going to stand up and run screaming from church or the grocery store or the family gathering or wherever you are. And so there's the fear of behaving irrationally and panicking, which increases the anxiety.
So we had studied panic disorder a little bit at school, and I never knew what it was except scientifically what that is. I was climbing a mountain one time on a rock face. I was leading the pitch. I wasn't hooked into the mountain. I was free climbing. Well, you only fall 5 or 6 feet when you're free climbing because you put pitons in at various paces. And all of a sudden I realized what I was doing, where I was. I looked down, wow, and I started shaking. And it took a tremendous amount of self-will and self-control to get over that panic attack. I never had another one, but I was glad I did that because I didn't know what it was until I actually experienced it.
And usually when people first experience, they don't know what it is. And it's a scary experience. Very often people feel like it's a heart attack, and so they go to the emergency room, and the emergency room checks them out, says it's not a heart attack, it's the panic attack. Okay? And for some people that reduces the anxiety. If you know that it's not a heart attack, then the last one, fear of dying. Well, okay, at least I'm not dying, but there's still the fear that you're going to have a panic attack in public and go crazy and act stupid and those kinds of things. Also, if you do have heart problems, it's a problem. I've interviewed people who have had both panic attacks and heart attacks, and they say they can't tell the difference. So it would be nice to have a simple way to say, well, a panic attack feels like this and a heart attack feels like this, but they feel very similar. They can be intense chest pain, radiating down your arm, all those kinds of things. So it's scary. So when you have one, especially if you're first having one, go to the emergency room. The panic attacks also illustrate an issue with anxiety is often it starts with the fear of something, but pretty soon it becomes the fear of anxiety itself. Okay, so once you have a panic attack or two, all of a sudden your fear becomes, I'm going to have another panic attack. And so you really intensely don't want to have a panic attack, so you avoid anything that you think might cause a panic attack. Okay? Sometimes they come at random. Often they come when you're stressed, at work, climbing mountains, doing other stressful things. And so people start to avoid things that might cause a panic attack, or I might look stupid, I might look crazy if I have a panic attack in public. And so that's for a lot of the anxiety disorders. Your life becomes centered around doing things so that you don't get anxious. Because anxiety is a very unpleasant feeling. And so we're very motivated to not be anxious. That's our whole, if you think about it with the fight or flight response, it's set up to get you out of trouble in the short term. And so we're motivated to do that. Let's see. Panic attacks often turn into agoraphobia because going out in public makes you nervous. Also, anything that gets your heart rate up can make you feel like you're having a panic attack. So people with panic disorders will often avoid any kind of exercise or exertion because exercise or exertion will increase your risk in the short term for a panic attack. Now, obviously, long term, you want to exercise, but it does increase your risk. So if you have a history of panic attacks and you go jogging, that's going to increase your risk of a panic attack. So people quit exercising. People quit doing things because they don't want to have an anxiety attack. Let's see.
Question.
Yes.
Is there a period of life when people either develop or express these anxiety disorders? Teenagers, young adults. It would seem unusual for a 30 or 40-year-old, but maybe not. Is there any studies on that?
Well, the tendency to have anxiety disorders is usually present from early on. You can think of it as a personality trait, and so a lot of times you'll see anxiety start at an early age. When the panic attacks happen, it can be often in teenage years because there's a lot of stress when you're a teenager. There's a lot of things to be anxious and nervous about. On the other hand, panic attacks can start middle age, adulthood. If you start having physical health problems, if you have a lot of stress going on, family relationships problems, deaths in the family, all those kinds of things can trigger your first panic attack. And again, there's a difference between panic attacks and panic disorder. Lots of people have panic attacks, like Gerard. Lots of people, if you really went down to it, it might be even a majority of people have had a panic attack or two. But for some people, and particularly people who already tend to be anxious, the panic attacks then cause the avoidance, which causes more panic attacks, and so you start to develop that. So panic disorder can develop at any time in life. Usually there's going to be a stressor going on, okay? Whether it's in adolescence or whether it's when you're 30 or whether it's when you're 50, 80, okay? So yeah, they can start at any time. And health problems are a big contributor. If you've had a heart attack and had heart problems, then these panic attacks, which were normal, all of a sudden become very scary, because you know you're at risk for a heart attack, so all of a sudden your heart's racing, you have chest pain, that's frightening, yeah.
If a child or a teenager is prone to being anxious or having panic attacks, is it something they grow out of?
Yes, well, yes, quite possibly. It's not necessarily chronic. Particularly panic attacks can come and go. Lots of people get over them. The stressful situation goes away. If you're an anxious person, that tends to be personality trait, and you don't go from being anxious to not anxious very often, although some people do. But the form it takes can vary. It can become more severe, less severe. So you can have panic attacks in your teenage years, and over time you learn coping skills. Your life situation gets better. Things get less stressful, perhaps. Then your panic attacks go away. Panic attacks actually can be really devastating. People who have panic disorder. On the other hand, a lot of people learn to manage them pretty well. And so we'll talk a little bit about how you do that with breathing, with simple breathing techniques. And so they become less severe, so you don't avoid. So you still have them, but you're like, oh, shoot, another panic attack. Let me calm down, relax, and you got to take some time out of your schedule, 15 minutes or whatever, and calm down. But you know what it is, So for a lot of people, kind of that process of going to the emergency room, making sure you're not really dying, understanding what this is, and understanding a little bit of how to resolve it can become manageable pretty quickly, really. Let's see. Post-traumatic stress disorder is an anxiety disorder that happens when you have experienced a traumatic experience. And here, you need to kind of define a traumatic event. That's where it happens to you or somebody, you witness it happening in person. There's a threat of death or injury. So you getting assaulted, you getting raped, abused, somebody pointing a gun at you, saying, I'm going to shoot you, even if they don't do anything physically to you. Also, if you see that happen to somebody else who's right there with you. Any sort of threat of death or serious injury, your body responds with a really intense physiological arousal, fight or flight response. And then that triggers your brain to be on alert in the future, okay, for threats. Okay. So the most common situation, or I don't know if it's the most common, but kind of where they began to discover it with combat veterans. Okay, and so particularly if you go through one experience, your risk for post-traumatic stress disorder is low, but it does increase it. If you go through multiple ones, like people in combat, then your risk for post-traumatic stress goes up. Okay, your brain gets, if you've been in combat, you're just on alert, constantly on alert, and so you have an exaggerated startle response. A loud noise, somebody comes up behind you, you jump real big. Okay, you're hypervigilant, so you go out in public, you're always watching. Sort of like, or police officers, you're always watching to see who's around you and what's behind you. When you go to the restaurant, you sit with your back to the wall so you can see the front door. When you walk in a store or a restaurant, you check where's the exits at. Those are the hypervigilance kind of thing. You're always prepared for something bad to happen.
That's not necessarily a bad thing to be hypervigilant, is it? I mean, that's what I do. I sit at the back.
Well, to have post-traumatic stress, you have a cluster of things.
Yeah.
But if it's extreme, where you can't relax, you can't enjoy going out to eat, then it can become a problem. Because, and of course, it depends on where you are. There are some places that are safe, and that really you don't need to be like that. Okay, most of you don't need to be hypervigilant right now. Okay, your risk of something traumatic, dangerous happening is extremely low. Okay,
well,
if you're in downtown Philadelphia, you should be hypervigilant. Okay, but with post-traumatic stress disorder, it's not a rational sort of, okay, there's some dangers here, I'm going to keep an eye out. It's you can't help it. Okay, you can be in the most peaceful place and you know it's peaceful, and you know rationally it's not, but your body's on alert. You have intrusive memories, thoughts, things remind you of it, so you can have nightmares. If you were a victim of abuse as a child, you see somebody who looks like the person who abused you, causes that reaction, that anxiety reaction. Veterans, I had one veteran tell me that actually Western North Carolina mountains look a lot like Afghanistan. And so being around the mountains was very distressing for him. In Iraq and Iran, there was all these roadside bombs, so driving down the road, a paper bag on the side of the road just promotes almost a panic attack, okay, because it's a threat. And so there's all kinds of things can remind you of the trauma that you experienced. Sleep disturbance, difficulty going to sleep. People with post-traumatic stress disorder kind of detach from people. They're emotionally distant. They can be more irritable. They lose interest in activities and those kinds of things. So when you've gone through traumatic experiences, you can have this response. And I want to make a distinction between traumatic experiences and stressful experiences. Both of them can be very bad for you. Okay. Traumatic experience. You're a child and your father, I'm not going to pick on my mom tonight. Your father beats you. Two times in your childhood, he beats you. Like you said, he's about to send you back to your maker. Okay, he really beats you severely. It's very frightening. That's traumatic. Okay. Growing up, your father always tells you you're stupid and you'll never amount to anything. Okay, that's stressful. Okay, and it's bad, but it's not a trauma. Okay, it may even cause worse problems than the two severe beatings that you got, but it's not a trauma. So it's not just something stressful happened. It's you witnessed that threat where you felt you were under threat. that kind of causes the post-traumatic stress. Okay. Let's see. The catch-all sort of anxiety disorder is generalized anxiety disorder. People with generalized anxiety disorder worry about everything. Okay, so they just worry all the time. Okay, and if you solve one problem, they'll find another problem to worry about. Okay, they're going to worry about finances. They're going to worry about relationships. They're going to worry about illnesses. They're going to, they're always their mindset is always worrying. They're always stressed about something. Let's see. So with the different anxiety disorders, you can see some are very physiological, like panic attacks. Generalized anxiety disorder is not necessarily panic attacks or anything like that. It's more about your thoughts. Your thoughts are constantly thinking about what bad is going to happen next. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay. So that's kind of an overview of different kinds of anxiety disorders. There's actually a lot more, but we don't need to go over all of them in detail. That gives you a feel for the different kind of aspects of things. So what causes people to have anxiety disorders? All of us get anxious from time to time. What causes it? Well, genetics are a part of it. So it does tend to run in families. And if your parents were nervous, anxious, then you're going to tend to be anxious and you're going to be at higher risk for some of these anxiety disorders developing. Autonomic overreactivity. That's the fight or flight response. So different people have different level of responsiveness to stress. There's some people who are calm and easygoing, and it takes a lot to get them excited or scared or anything like that. They just don't respond the same way. And some people, the slightest thing goes wrong and their heart starts racing and their palms start sweating and those kinds of things. And sometimes could be something that's genetic. It could be something to do with brain chemistry. It could also be negative life events. Okay? If you've been through traumatic or anxiety-provoking events growing up, then your autonomic nervous system, which is what the fight or flight response is more active. Okay? So, for example, a veteran. Veterans who went through child abuse as a child are at increased risk to get post-traumatic stress. Even if it looks like they came through the childhood abuse without any symptoms of post-traumatic stress or anything like that, there's no sign of it, but that sort of prior experience makes them more reactive to the later experience. So, again, there are issues with brain chemistry, but that can also be affected by your genes, it can be affected by your life events and those kinds of things. The brain chemistry of anxiety is very complex. So it's not, with depression you focus on serotonin and maybe one other. There's a neurotransmitter called GABA, which is an abbreviation for a long word that I can't say. And basically what it does in your brain is slows down all of the message transmissions and all the reactivity in your brain. It slows down brain activity. So for some people, it may be that they don't have, the GABA is not active enough. And some of the medications that they give you, the anti-anxiety medications, increase GABA, so that kind of slows down your thinking. Okay? Part of anxiety is kind of your thoughts racing, all the bad things that could be happening. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Negative thought patterns. People who are anxious tend to have a lot of negative thought patterns, and we'll talk about those here in just a minute. So the autonomic nervous system, what it does when you're scared, when you have anxiety, is increase your heart rate and increase your blood pressure, okay, which is useful. Again, it's preparing you to fight or to run. Increases your respiration. We tend to focus on whatever's negative or dangerous around us, which makes sense. If you're in a threat situation, you're not worried about noticing the flowers over here. You're noticed on what are the things that could cause you danger. And so your mind automatically goes to those. sends blood to your muscles, so you can run, you can fight, and it shuts down your digestive system, okay? Because right now you're fighting the bear, you don't need to be digesting your food, okay? If you lose, you're not going to need it anyway. So it shuts it down. Now, that's fine for these brief, stressful situations, but when you undergo chronic stress, when you have an anxiety disorder, you're anxious all the time, you're stressed frequently, what that means is can cause digestive problems because it's constantly shutting down your digestive system. It alters, anxiety is associated with risk for ulcers, okay? So, because you can have an accumulation of acids and other digestive problems as well, okay? So it's making some things more active and other things it's shutting down that aren't necessary. Okay. I've been running through lecturing a lot here. Questions that have come up so far? Okay. Yeah.
What are they doing for veterans that have gone through all these battles? I mean, I know they're trained. I think every veteran has been through a training program where you have to crawl under live machine gun fire with a full pack.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, you hug the ground very close.
Yeah.
Because it's only 30 inches above. You don't flee and run. You learn to handle it.
Right.
But nowadays you hear so many thousands of our vets are having major problems and committing suicide because of what they've been through. What can be done for these people that can eliminate this more?
Well, they do have intervention programs. There are some medications they can use that can help reduce the symptoms. There's counseling that can be helpful. And so the VA has a lot of programs for the veterans who want to take advantage of it. One of the big problems is there's not a medication that takes care of all the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. So you can get rid of you can reduce the nightmares, but most of the other symptoms don't respond that well. What you have to do is go through counseling, okay? And so, and that can be pretty effective if you're willing to go. The problem is avoidance, okay? Part of counseling for post-traumatic stress is talking about it, okay? And so if you're a vet that has post-traumatic stress and you have nightmares and you have constant recurring thoughts about the things you went through, do you want to go talk about it? No. So that's the problem, is getting the vets to go consistently. It's not fun therapy. And so it's pretty effective for the ones who go through it. We respond to short-term reinforcements. It's a lot quicker and easier to get drunk, okay, or to get high. And then your anxiety goes away for a little bit. And so that's why you have a lot of substance abuse problems among the veterans. And that's the difficult part, is getting them in and getting them in for treatment. Let's see. Well, let's talk a little bit about treatment for anxiety. We'll start with talking about medications. There's a class of anti-anxiety medications called benzodiazepines. Valium, Xanax, Klonopin, there's some others too. And they're very effective in reducing anxiety. Okay, so if you're anxious and you take a Xanax, your anxiety is probably going to go away. They're not that dangerous in and of themselves, and they're difficult to overdose on, unless you combine them with alcohol, which is a problem. The problem is that we adjust to them. Okay, so the first time you take a Xanax, it's likely to get rid of your anxiety. If you take it again, if you take it every day, you're going to need to start taking more Xanax. And usually, for most people who take it regularly, you need an increasing dosage to have the same effect. Also, your brain adjusts to it. Okay, so this is the benzodiazepines increase your GABA. Okay, our brain monitors what's going on in it, and says, oh man, I've got plenty of GABA, I'm going to make less. Okay, which is fine as long as you're taking the Xanax. Okay, but if you stop taking the Xanax, then you have an anxiety rebound. And so your anxiety goes back to being worse than it was before you started. So for long-term treatment for anxiety disorders, benzodiazepines are mostly not used anymore because they're just not a good long-term treatment. If you're going through a stressful situation, you have a family member dies, you have a traumatic experience, and your doctor knows you, he might prescribe you 10 Xanaxes. Take these when you need them to calm down and all those kinds of things. But he's not going to want to go much beyond that. Okay? And doctors have become very shy about prescribing these. Because they're abusable, you can sell them on the street. If you know your doctor well and you have occasional panic attacks, he may prescribe you 10 or 20 of them to have just to keep with you, so if something happens, you can take it. Now, if you start taking them frequently, then he's going to say, we need to do something else. Okay. There are other anti-anxiety medications, buspirone, Paxil. They've started prescribing antidepressant medications for anxiety. Zoloft, Prozac, all of those. It's very common now. Just my experience is it's mixed. They're not. It helps some people, and some people it doesn't. Of course, depression and anxiety are associated. So if you have anxiety, you're more likely to have depression, and vice versa. So it's hard to tell, is that getting rid of your depression or your anxiety? But that's currently kind of the first line of defense. If you go in and feel anxious, they're going to give you some Prozac or something like that. They also give some, interestingly, a couple of medications that were originally blood pressure medications for people with panic attacks or for people with post-traumatic stress. So propranolol is a blood pressure medication, apparently not the most effective one, so they don't prescribe it that much for blood pressure anymore. But if you're having panic attacks, it lowers your blood pressure, it lowers your reactivity, so it gets rid of anxiety that way. Prazosin, interestingly enough, they prescribe that to treat nightmares. So if you take prazosin, it will, for a lot of people, reduce or eliminate your nightmares. But it's a blood pressure medication. Its original name was, I think, Minipress or something like that. So I'm not sure exactly, I'm not medical enough to know exactly the mechanism or if they even know the mechanism. A lot of treatments in mental health are things that we stumbled onto. Okay, so I think there's probably a good chance that a doctor prescribed this medication, prazosin, for somebody with post-traumatic stress, and his nightmares went away. And the doctor said, let me try it with another client. And so it seems to do it. But it is, so if you have a lot of intense nightmares, they may prescribe you prazosin. And that can control part of the post-traumatic stress, but it doesn't get rid of the rest of the post-traumatic stress. So there's not a good medical treatment right now for anxiety, to be blunt. There's medical treatment that will get you through an anxious situation, but for the most part, they're pretty mixed and not very good at in terms of just treating anxiety. What else can you do to relieve anxiety? Avoid stimulants. Okay, because what do caffeine and nicotine do to your blood pressure and your heart rate? They increase your heart rate. They increase your blood pressure. They do all of the things that it's a fight or flight response. Okay, caffeine the same. And so those things increase your risk for panic attacks and increase your risk for anxiety. Now this is paradoxical because there's a lot of people who will tell you that having that cup of coffee calms them down. Okay, or smoking that cigarette. After work, you're stressed, you smoke a cigarette, you feel better. Okay. And again, what you're seeing is short-term kind of benefits, but long-term, the information is pretty clear that doing those things increases your risk for anxiety, even though it doesn't seem like it to you. And if you can cut down those stimulants, then it will decrease your risk for anxiety and those kinds of things. The other one on there is marijuana, and there's a lot of people who are going to disagree with me on this one, but I'm going to put it out there. marijuana has become very common. You can buy all kinds of CBD, THC, all of that's legal. You can go down to the store and buy them now. And you can smoke it. A lot of people say marijuana reduces their anxiety. The research says that marijuana use is associated with increased anxiety. It actually increases your anxiety, even though it seems like it doesn't. If it works for you, it works for you, but be thinking about those long-term things. Also, you have to think about short-term relief of anxiety and long-term relief of anxiety. Okay? Benzodiazepines relieve anxiety. They are great. If you could take a Valium after work every day, reduce your anxiety, just as good as marijuana. Okay? Quite frankly, there's another medication for anxiety that I didn't put up there, alcohol. Drink some alcohol, your anxiety will go down. Okay? So there are risks to that kind of coping style in terms of dealing with anxiety. Okay? So to take care of an anxiety-provoking event, maybe those things work fine. But as an ongoing basis, they increase your anxiety, they increase your stress, and so they're not very effective. But we get caught in sort of the short term, it relieved it immediately. Okay? With post-traumatic stress, very, very common that they have substance abuse problems. Alcohol, marijuana, painkillers, anything that kind of mellows them out a little bit they're going to be at risk for. Okay. All right, so what can you do we've told you all the things that don't really work for anxiety. What can you do for anxiety? Fortunately, there are some things that are relatively quick and easy compared to, quite frankly, compared to the therapy treatments for depression and those kinds of things. The biggest thing is physical relaxation. People who have anxiety have difficulty relaxing just physically. They're tense. That's what anxiety is. You're tense, you're on edge. And so one of the most effective things you can do is teach them to relax. Initially, they came up with something called progressive muscle relaxation. And basically what you do is you take different muscle groups, so you start with the extremities, take your hands, clench them, hold them, and then release them. Okay, then your biceps. Hold them, clench, release. Tension and release. Do your legs, tense them up, hold them, release them. Core, tense them up, hold them, release them. You go through that series through your body. It relaxes your body, and it reduces your anxiety. Okay, and it reduces some of that physical tension. Now, particularly for panic attacks, they've discovered that you can abbreviate that very much, okay, with breathing exercises. And most of the research says that, for the most part, breathing exercises have almost as much effect as progressive muscle relaxation. They're a lot easier to do, a lot quicker. The basic idea of breathing with if you're having anxiety or panic attacks is to breathe slowly and evenly while you put everything that you're nervous out of your mind. Now, when you have a panic attack or when you're anxious, your respiration increases, but it also tends to be uneven. So you'll breathe in real quick, and it increases your oxygen, which increases your heart rate and all those kinds of things. And so that uneven sort of in real quick and out slow, or the other way works also, in slow and then exhaling real rapidly, causes your body to become more aroused, which is, again, it's the fight or flight response. That's what it's supposed to do. But you're trying to counteract that. And so what you do with the breathing exercises, there's different forms. You can Google them. There'll be a 1,000 of them. But basically, you want to breathe in slowly, breathe out slowly. Same pace. It should take you as long to breathe in as breathe out. And then the other thing you want to do is control what's going on, what the thoughts are going through your head. Okay, so it doesn't help if you're breathing in slowly, breathing out slowly, breathing in slowly, breathing out slowly, but your mind is going, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, or I'm going to fail, or My mother's not going to approve of me. Had to get a shot in. So you have to get those thoughts out of your mind, which is the hard part for anxious people. Basically, this is telling you to don't be anxious, but it's hard. It's hard to anxious people. Their thoughts tend to run. They're scared. They're worried. And so one way to do it, the way I do it when I do breathing exercises, is to count. So as I'm breathing in, I'll go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Obviously, not speaking out loud in my head. Okay, so that my mind is occupied with the numbers. I'm just focusing on the numbers. And 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And I kind of visualize going up the hill, down the hill. So inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. So slowly do that. Usually do that up to 5 or maybe 10 at the most. We'll do a lot to reduce any kind of intense anxiety you're experiencing right then. Takes a bit of practice because you'll start breathing quickly. You'll start thinking, okay? You go 1, 1. What did I forget? I was supposed to do something at work today. So it's a little bit of discipline for your mind to put something else there. Other people, you'll find a mantra, a saying, a sound, a word, whatever you want to occupy your mind so that you're not thinking about the things that are stressful for you. Let's see. Yeah.
With these exercises, how long do you have to actually do this for it to work?
Say the breathing exercises, particularly once you have practiced it and gotten used to it, you can do that for a minute. Okay, so people who, if you've had panic attacks and you've practiced this and you've done this before and it works for you, it can be pretty rapid. Now, if your panic attack is persisting, then you'll continue. So the key part of it is it does take practice. Okay, the first time you do it, it's not going to be an amazing relief. I take that back. For some people, the first time it is. It's like, wow, that makes a big difference. But that practice relaxing, practice shutting out things going on in your mind, we're talking about a few minutes. Okay, if you want to do progressive muscle relaxation, you're not necessarily having a panic attack, but you're just constantly tense. You have kind of that generalized anxiety, constantly worrying. That takes longer. If you can spend 20 minutes going through the muscle groups, tensing them, relaxing them, tensing them, relaxing them, then that can potentially make a lot of difference. Yes, Glenn.
I have a book by a doctor that's on the medical staff at the University of Arizona. Mm-hmm. It's a big, thick book. I forgot what his name was. You'd probably know him. But he recommended, to do this, breathe 5 or 6 times if you're having trouble going to sleep at night. It takes care of this sleep disorder. Breathe in through your nose, just like you said, slow, and let it go out through your mouth the same way, 5 or 6 times, and it works.
Yeah, it is pretty effective, and given that sleep and being able to sleep is a big issue for a lot of people, it can be effective. It's not a cure-all, but it can be very effective, particularly if the reason you're not sleeping is because of anxiety. If the reason you're not sleeping for some people is because these thoughts are going through your mind and you're thinking of everything you've got to do today, everything you got to do or didn't do today, and everything you've got to do tomorrow, that sort of breathing, putting everything out of your mind can be very helpful in terms of improving sleep. That's a big one. The breathing exercises is, if you tend to be anxious, tend to be stressed, that's one to practice and put into practice. Okay, I'm getting older and working on keeping blood pressure down, and I can measure my blood pressure, and if I take it and it's up, it can lower it 10 points. Just by I said, oh man, it's up. I can never admit that to my wife, so I'm going to relax for a minute. Relax, my blood pressure go down. I tell Karen, look, my blood pressure's fine. She's probably watching right now, so my secret's blown. But it does make a significant difference. So it is one of those things that's Actually pretty easy. It does take some practice to where you're good at it, but it's pretty easy. One possible relief of anxiety is massage, and that's great. That will relax you. The only problem with that is that's not something you can necessarily use to cope with daily stresses and those kinds of things. So unless you're married to a masseuse. It is important that you learn to control your own anxiety by your own actions. Okay, so massage will give you that temporary relief, but you need to learn how to relax yourself as well. For other kinds of anxiety, if you have a fear of something that makes you nervous, gradual exposure to what makes you anxious. Okay, I've been saying over and over, the problem with anxiety is it makes you avoid stuff. Okay, so you got to stop avoiding it. Okay, gradual exposure being key. Okay, you don't want to throw somebody who is afraid of the water into the deep end of the pool, and when they make it to the side, you say, "Oh, see, you didn't drown." Will that work? Will their anxiety be gone then? They didn't drown. No. Well, because did they have a pleasant experience in the water? No, they had a terrifying experience in the water, even though they didn't drown. Okay? People with fear of flying can fly, but it doesn't get rid of their anxiety because they've spent the whole flight terrified. So next time you have to go on a plane, you're still terrified. You're probably more afraid of being terrified than a plane crash. Well, that's part of what the anxiety does. It makes you afraid of being anxious. So that might make me anxious, so I'm not going to do it. Systematic desensitization, you want to go gradually. Another thing, with post-traumatic stress. When we first started knowing about post-traumatic stress and saying we need to get treatment, we need to get counseling for this, they put all these rapid response teams, because part of treatment for post-traumatic stress is being able to talk about the event, okay? And as you talk about it in a safe space, it's not as threatening, and so it becomes less anxiety-provoking than you learn. So they thought, well, shoot, we'll be ready to go, and whenever there's a trauma, whether there's a school shooting, there's a, whatever it is, we'll get people in there right away, and we can sit down and we can talk with them, and they can process it, okay? Not helpful, okay? Can make it worse, okay? There's a reason after a trauma you don't want to talk about it, okay? It's too overwhelming. Your brain is saying, no, I don't want to talk about it now. It's too overwhelming. And so when you've been through a trauma, a lot of times you need some time. You need to get past the trauma to where you can start talking about it. So you don't want to jump in right in. The same thing with any kind of fear that you have. Public speaking. You don't want to just jump up on the platform on Sabbath morning and say, okay, I'm going to give a sermon. Okay, you're going to gradually do it. So for example, fear of spiders. What they'll do is they'll teach you relaxation skills. This is key for all of anxiety, relaxation. Breathing, progressive muscle relaxation. So before they expose you to it, they teach you how to relax. And then they say, okay, I want you to imagine that there's a spider 6 feet away from you in an aquarium. Okay, so it can't get to you. Sit there, visualize it, think about it, and relax. Okay. Now, when you can do that, imagine in your mind that the aquarium's right by you. Okay. And relax while you do it. It's going to make you anxious. Relax. Okay. Eventually, they're going to move when you can relax thinking about spiders. The next thing they're going to do is they're going to bring a spider in the room, in an aquarium across the room, and now you sit there in the room, across the room from the spider, and do your relaxation skills. Okay. Then they're going to move the spider closer.
And
then,
as soon as they put that spider on the ground, I'm going to step on it.
Oh, they're not putting the spider on the ground. This is, for a simple phobia like a spider or a snake, this is incredibly effective. If people have a motivation to go through with it, you will end up with the tarantula in your hand, calm. If you do it gradually. Now, most people don't have the motivation. They're like, why do I want to do that? Okay? And unless your job is working with spiders, why would you want to do it? But if for some reason you need to, you're married to George Grow. Some of us know he had spiders when he was teaching biology. Yeah, George.
Can I tell you really
Sure.
quick that one of the teachers who was here years ago was deathly afraid of snakes. And we had a snake in the department.
Yeah.
And so we had to talk about it. She didn't want to pass this fear or anxiety on to her child. So there was some motivation for her to learn. She did it. In other words, she would come and just peek around the corner when she felt like that she wanted to really learn this. And it worked. She worked at it because I get a call a few months later and she says, you better come out here in the middle of someplace. She told me on campus, there's a snake there. So I knew she had really gotten over that because she was willing to call calmly and say.
She didn't run screaming from the snake. She said, okay, I'm going to call George.
And she may have backed off a ways and that would be fine.
Right.
But she was calm enough to, and so we went out. It was a poisonous snake. So.
It is very effective. Again, these simple phobias like spiders and snakes and stuff, most of the time that doesn't affect us, so we don't need treatment for it. But in those cases where you do, it's very effective. Now, that's a lesson, I think, for other kind of anxieties, social anxiety, other kinds of things, fear of going out, agoraphobia, going out into public, and those kinds of things. The same thing can work, okay? Again, if you have agoraphobia, you're afraid of going out into big spaces, you don't go first to Walmart, okay? You imagine, you think about it, relax, okay? Your first trip out is just down to the post office while you're doing your relaxation skills. And what's key is to do the relaxation skills because people with anxiety have already had exposure, okay? If you're anxious of going to the store, you've been to the store many times, you got anxious and you didn't get over your anxiety. As a matter of fact, it made it worse because you got anxious, okay? So the relaxation is the key part of it. You got to relax and learn to relax. Do just a little bit. Just drive up to the food line, okay? Park there, look at the door, and relax. Then go home. It's okay. You don't have to go in. Next time, maybe you go up there, you relax, you walk up to the door, stand there, look around, do your breathing. People are going to look at you funny, but there's a lot of strange people on the streets these days. They probably won't even notice you. It's Asheville. And so you relax, you go home. Okay, again, you're not under pressure to go through the whole thing. And if you do that, you can cure most fears, most specific anxieties. If you have generalized anxiety, you're anxious about everything, so it's not as effective. But you can address certain situations that are making you anxious. Yeah.
We had a clinic in Thailand, a live-in clinic. We had patients come and live with us and help them with the blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease. We had lots of snakes. There was as many snakes around as you see rabbits and squirrels around your house now. That's how many snakes we had. And everybody was afraid of them. And there's a few of them were phobic. And so I ordered some formaldehyde, and I caught as many snakes as I could, the poisonous ones, and wrapped them in a little bundle and put them in the jars so I could educate our children and our patients. And it seemed to help some, but my primary goal was to make sure nobody got bit by a snake while I was there, and nobody did. Yeah. The biggest snake we caught was 10 foot 3 inches, cobra.
And people who live around a lot of snakes, more of them tend not to, they may be cautious of them, but they don't have necessarily the panic anxiety responses, where most people who have that intense fear of snakes rarely run into snakes. Okay, it's not based on, I got bit by a snake. There's something in us, and mentally we're prepared to develop some kinds of phobias quickly, spiders and snakes. Other kind of phobias are, developing phobias of fluffy white things is not common. It's very difficult. You'd have to have a lot of trauma with fluffy white things before you do it. So biologically, we're prone to be afraid of certain things, loud noises, and certain animals and those kinds of things. Changes in your thought patterns. And this particularly, anxiety disorders that are more thinking related, like generalized anxiety disorder or some social anxiety, you're going to have to change some of your thought patterns. So people who are anxious tend to overestimate the risk they're at. Okay, so they think they're in more danger than they are. And so you have to start doing and with a therapist or by yourself, sort of assessing really how much danger am I? I'm worried about, this is a matter of sort of identifying and challenging your thoughts, okay? I'm messing up at work, they're gonna fire me, Well, you have to sort of assess really how likely is it that they're gonna fire me? And recognize that you're overestimating the risk. Also, they tend to overestimate the harm, okay? And this is a little bit different concept. They overestimate how bad it will be if this bad thing happens. Okay, so if somebody with social anxiety, they're nervous because they're afraid they're going to do or say something stupid that's going to make them look bad. And so they're anxious, so they don't interact with people, they don't go out. Okay, so there's two things there. They may be overestimating how bad they'll look and whether people will think badly of them. Or they may be overestimating how bad that is. So let me give you an example. One of the early psychologists, cognitive behavioral psychologists, used to give assignments to people. And for people with social anxiety, one of them he would give was go out and get on a public bus and wait till the doors close and then sing Mary Had a Little Lamb at the top of your lungs. And then get off at the next stop. Okay? Now, what is the risk of people thinking you're stupid or crazy? It's pretty high, right? Okay. What is the harm that's done? You get off that bus, how did that affect your life? People thought you were an idiot or crazy. So what? So there's two levels that can say, it's sort of saying, this bad thing's not going to happen, or it's, if this bad thing happens, it's not good, but it's not the end of the world. Okay. Obviously, when Gerard says, hey, do a presentation, Todd, I'm thinking, oh man, I'm going to look really stupid. Okay. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Maybe I overestimate the risk of it. But the other level is, it's not on a public bus, but if I get up here and I'm really boring, how bad is that? Okay. Well, they're not going to ask me to do it again. Right. And people might think, well, he's not a very good public speaker. But people are not going to hate me because I did something dumb. Okay. People with social anxiety tend to overestimate. If I do something dumb, then that's going to be, nobody's going to want to hang out with me if I do something dumb. Okay. If I say something dumb. Okay. Well, if that was the case, we'd all be in a lot of trouble. Okay. But for people with social anxiety, that's a real concern. That's their concern. Sometimes it's unspoken. Okay. A lot of times that's, where did we go? Okay. A lot of times that's what a counselor can help you understand is, what is it that you're fearing will happen? Why are you anxious about being around people? And help you, because to you it just feels like there's a person there, I'm anxious. There's a person there, I'm anxious. There's the thoughts that are going on underneath. So if I say the wrong thing, I'm going to look bad. Okay. If I say the wrong thing, they're going to hate me. If I mess up at my job, they're going to fire me. Okay. Well, how likely is that? And if they did, how much harm would that be? Would you be able to find another job? The same, so negative thought patterns must and always, people who are anxious, like people who are depressed, tend to have this feeling that I must always, for example, people with social anxiety, I must always appear intelligent and friendly. Okay, and anything that doesn't coincide with that is terrible. Okay, and the focus on the negative. People who are anxious tend to focus on, like I said, there can be, if there's 10 things out there, 2 of them are bad and 8 of them are good, person with anxiety or with depression is going to look at those two. And so it is a process of saying, recognizing that and making yourself say, look, these are the other things that are good. Focus on those, okay? Because when you're anxious, your attention is drawn to the bad things that could happen. So it's a matter of, all of these things it's just a matter of practice. A counselor can be helpful in identifying what those thoughts are, but if you kind of know that's where my mind goes, also know that you can't control every thought that goes through your mind, but you can have an impact on the general direction your mind goes, and you can focus more on things that are more positive. Let's see, what else? Okay. We put this slide up for depression, but again, things we experience, an event happens, and we experience an emotion. But there's always a thought that goes in between there. We've been talking about anxiety and the fight or flight response, increased heart rate, increased respiration, sweaty palms, all those kinds of things. That's what you experience when you're feeling fear or anger or excitement. So how do you know whether you're feeling fear or anger or excitement? We go to Six Flags in Georgia, and me and my wife, Karen, get on the biggest roller coaster there. Okay? We're going up the big hill, and we're both having the same physiological response. Our hearts are pounding, our palms are sweaty, we're breathing rapidly, but we're having two different emotions. I'm excited, and she's terrified. If you have to speak publicly, your heart's racing, your palms are sweaty. Are you excited, or are you scared? Okay. Yeah.
If she's terrified on that one trip, did she go on another one?
What?
If she's terrified on that roller coaster, does she go on another one?
Well, those of you who know Karen know she doesn't go on it in the first place.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So would you take an analysis starting off at a smaller roller coaster?
Yeah. That's exactly what you do.
Repeat the question.
See, Cal said, so would you start off by starting on a smaller roller coaster and working your way up? And yes, that would be effective. You go through the series of the bigger and bigger. However, it requires a motivation. Okay, just like the motivation to get over your fear of snakes and spiders, if you have no desire to get over the fear of snakes and spiders, you're not going to go through the systematic desensitization. And if you have no if you have no motivation to ride the big scary roller coaster, then why would you go through the progression? So now, when you're a teenager, you have a reason, right? Because everybody else will think you're a chicken, okay? And so there's a lot of motivation to go through and do it. When you're 50 years old, I'm not going on the roller coaster. That's okay. So, yeah, there are effective treatments, but you do have to have the motivation. But it is important to remember that physiological arousal for the different emotions, there are subtle differences, but it's pretty similar for all of them, okay? And so to a certain extent, what you're feeling is partly determined by what you think is going on, whether you feel frightened or angry, or whether you feel angry or excited. Interesting piece of research from a number of years ago, I don't know how much they've replicated it, but among couples who describe themselves as happy, so not distressed couples, but it's among couples who describe themselves as happy, the number of arguments was correlated positively with how often they had sex. Because they're both, that's an emotional, some relationships are very emotional and passionate, angry and otherwise. And some relationships are more even keel, and they never argue, but maybe there's less of the other. These are on average correlations, but so your emotion can change from arguing and angry to passionate. But of course, that's only in the context of a happy relationship that you would describe. Once you get to the point where you don't trust the other person, then it goes the opposite direction. And so it kind of diverges, and the more arguments you have, the less often you have intimate relationships. But there's the emotions physiologically are very similar across emotions. And so mentally and what we're thinking is a key factor. Let's see. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Well, I mentioned last time, kind of characterized it as wise friend therapy, where you go, somebody who's had some experience, they can talk with you and give you advice, help you understand what's going on. Can be helpful. Most of them will teach you, most counselors now will teach you some breathing exercises, so that's helpful. There's not a lot of evidence that just kind of understanding your childhood and your background and all that, where that came from, is very helpful with anxiety-related disorders, maybe more helpful with depression. But if they mix in some breathing techniques and kind of help you kind of go through some traumatic experiences, it might be helpful. Cognitive behavioral therapy identifies and changes your thoughts and behavior patterns. So they're going to look at what are you avoiding. They're going to do the systematic desensitization. They're going to give you assignments like the one I described. Most of them not as radical as getting on the bus and singing Mary Had a Little Lamb, but they're going to give you this sort of gradual assignments to whatever it is that's most frightening for you to work your way up towards them. And they tend to be focused on present thoughts and feelings. With post-traumatic stress disorder, there's a little bit of a difference. With post-traumatic stress disorder, there ultimately is going to be usually some kind of going back and recalling the events and processing them so you can think about them so that they are, I'm trying to think of how to say this, merely unpleasant instead of traumatic. Okay? For someone with post-traumatic stress disorder, that memory of that whatever combat, that abuse, is overwhelming when you think about it. And so in a therapy session, you're going to be able to be safe, talk about it a little bit, and if you get too overwhelmed, the therapist will pull back. Eventually, you'll be able to talk about it. It will never be a pleasant experience, but you can talk about it, say, okay, this was something that happened, and no longer have the physiological response, and it becomes less intense. And so then you have less of the avoidance response and those kinds of things. So that, with post-traumatic stress, you will usually need to go back, not over every single thing that happened to you, but over some of the traumatic things to where you can talk about them without being overwhelmed by the stress. Okay, so again here with the cognitive behavioral approach, identify the thoughts. If you tend to be anxious, notice the thoughts you're thinking. Are you overestimating? Are you worrying that something's going to happen when it probably won't? Okay, realistically, am I likely to get shot in the Food Lion? Okay. Realistically, are people going to think I'm stupid if I just say something wrong? And catch yourself, and then replace it with something more adaptive. Okay, and just this is a slow process of changing your thought patterns. The physiological relaxation is a pretty quick process. The changing your thought pattern is quite frankly, it's a lifelong process. You have to keep at it because we easily fall back into focusing on the negative things. Okay. So, helping yourself versus helping others. Relax, breathe, don't avoid stuff, and exercise. Even though exercising can somewhat increase your short-term risk of panic attacks, the more you exercise, the more you get used to having the physical symptom of being aroused. Okay? So if you have panic attacks, your heart racing makes you nervous. Okay? But if you can get on the treadmill or run around the block, your heart racing may make you a little bit nervous, but you can say, okay, it's pounding because I just ran. And so it's not as frightening. And the more you exercise, the more you get used to that feeling, the less frightening it becomes. Let's see. Encourage people to help other people with anxiety. Encourage them to be active, to get out and do. If you can see things they're avoiding because of their anxiety, encourage them. Don't force them, because it's not going to help. Okay, I can force my wife to go on the big roller coaster or even the smaller roller coaster. It's not going to help until she's motivated to do it. So encourage them to do things to be less avoidant. Get to know them and get a feeling for what it is they are worried about. What are they afraid of? And that way you can work around it a little bit. Okay, if they're mostly afraid of running into people and doing and saying something stupid, so they've withdrawn and just stay home, well, take them say, let's go for a hike in the woods where you'll not see anybody else but me. Okay, so that's less anxiety provoking. But you have to get to know them a little bit and understand kind of gradually getting them to do the things that they're avoiding. And you can take that systematic desensitization and say, if they don't want to leave the house, let's sit on the porch. Okay, and then I don't know, I got to run down to the grocery store. You can stay in the car and I'm going to go in. Those kinds of things, gradually encourage them. But forcing them to talk about, to do things or to talk about their anxiety when they're not ready is generally not going to be helpful. It'll make it an anxiety-provoking experience. And then modeling positive thinking. Again, you focus on the positive as much as possible, and people learn from what's around them. And if you're around negative people, your thoughts will go negative, and if you're around positive people, your thoughts can become more positive. Let's see. Spirituality. How can our religious beliefs help us? Our relationship with God help us? One of the biggest things is it puts dangers and risks into perspective. Okay, we're afraid of stuff happening. We're afraid of getting harmed, getting hurt, and that's natural. But when you have a religious faith that says there's more than just this life, then those become things that you don't want to happen, but they're not as catastrophic as if you don't know what's happening. Yeah.
Also, you'd focus, wouldn't you, on the point of God offers protection in this particular case.
Yeah. And so God can protect you. We know that He doesn't always, but also, if you have a relationship with God, the times He doesn't protect you, that's He's made a decision that's, I don't know if it's for the best, but that's the way it is, and He can make something good out of it. He doesn't always protect you, but He can, so that gives you a reassurance. And if He doesn't, there's more after that as well, but He does, yes.
Things happen, He's with you.
Yes.
That's good enough to say.
He's always with you, even if bad things happen to you.
Right. So there's the assurance of Him being with you, and it gives a sense of meaning and purpose. Bad things may be happening, but there's a reason. Okay, we understand that we have a bigger purpose than just living and being safe. We have responsibilities to reach out to other people spiritually, physically, mentally. Typically, religious activities and religious beliefs are associated with social interaction, and that's a big part. God tells us to meet together, to gather together, and that's for both depression and anxiety. That's important, social contact. It also, religious beliefs can help us focus on, we have a mission, and focusing more on other people. Sometimes anxiety comes from too much focus on yourself. Okay, you're worried about your problems and the things going on in your life, and if you can be focused on and doing and meeting other people's needs to a certain extent, that can reduce your anxiety. And of course, lots of religious beliefs tell us not to get drunk, not to use drugs, not to do other short-term things that may briefly relieve anxiety but don't do much for us in the long term. All right. Any other questions? I think we will wrap up then. And any other- nope. Okay.
Any other questions?
I was just going to recommend we all sing Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Doesn't count because y'all are all in on it. Now, if as a group we go out somewhere, we can all go to Food Lion and sing it. That would be something.
I was just going to recommend that in closing we all sing Mary Had a Little Lamb.
I'm not singing, and I have a good reason for it. Yeah. A number of years ago, when my daughter was about 7 years old, we were sitting back there, I think, and we were singing hymns, and she looked at me and said, "Dad, please don't sing." So I mostly mouth the hymns now. So. Okay. All right. Well, let's close with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for all the ways you've equipped us to deal with stressful situations. We pray that you'll send your protection for us and that you'll guide our thoughts so that we can reduce our stress and not feel overwhelmed. We pray that we'll feel safe in your protection and your grace. Amen.